Hey y'all, welcome to another episode. Today we're going to be the front end of my Cherokee after putting this 100+ pound bumper on the front of my Cherokee has dropped about an inch, inch and a half. And in general, it was like that before I even put the bumper on, but it increased the kind of difference. So you can see a noticeable dive in the front end versus the rear. You can't tell from this angle. So we're going to put in a 1.5 inch spacers and check caster angles and all that, and I'll show you how it's done. So keep watching. All right, so first steps, we are going to take this wheel off, and I'm only going to show you one side. As we put the spacers in, it's going to be the same process for the other side. So you want to take the wheel off, but before I jack up the car, I want to loosen the lug nuts, then jack up the car, then take the wheel off, and we can get access to the things we need to kind of loosen up and everything before we really jack up the car. And then let the suspension hang. So I'm gonna have to figure out how I'm gonna do that, and then I'll show you how it's done. But for now, all I have to do is loosen up these lug nuts and make sure they're cracked free, and then we'll figure out how I'm gonna lift it, etc. All right, so those are cracked loose. I'm going to go and do that on the other side. But this is where, in an earlier video, I talked about the kind of gear you're going to need to work on your suspension if you want to lift your XJ. And this is where jack stands are very important. So you're going to want to have, I think, some 12-ton jack stands, because they go tall and they go high and they allow your suspension to droop really, really far. So you may want to, if you don't have really big jack stands, you may want to get some before you attempt this. But that's just what I'm doing. I'm sure other people have their own ideas. Anyway, I'll go ahead and show you the next steps after I crack loose the lug nuts on the other side. All right, so I'm going to do a two-phase kind of jacking process and jack stands. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to jack it up by the axle, and then put these 12-ton jack stands under the axle. Remove the wheels. Then I'm going to loosen up the bottom bolts for the shocks so that those can disengage. And then once I've got those loosened, then I'm going to go ahead and jack it up again and move these jack stands to the frame so I can let the suspension hang down and droop as far as it'll go. So let's go ahead and just jack it up and put the jack stands under the axle, then we'll move on from there. One thing I forgot to mention, I have to put like 2x4s and stuff on my jack so that it'll go up high enough when jacking it up from the axle, because these jack stands are so damn tall. So be safe and careful when you do this. There are probably better and safer ways to do it, but this is what I've got on hand. And whatever you do, don't get underneath the car when you've only got it supported by the jack. You want to make sure you get the jack stands in place, and then go ahead and get underneath to do what you got to do. But anyway, that's why you're going to see me put some wood on here. All right, now that it's safe on jack stands, I'm going to go ahead and remove the wheels. One other thing to note here is I have these rough country spacers on. I'm going to do this off camera. Now's a good time, anytime you take your rails off or do this kind of work, it's a good time to go ahead and put some grease in your fittings and to check the tightness of this. Now I torqued those down to spec. What I'll do is I'll take my torque wrench and then I'll set it to like 10 or 20 pounds below the torque setting, and I'll just go through and hear it click, and then I'll know it's good. And you'll also see I marked these, and they haven't moved, but I want to be safe. Last thing I want is for those spacers to come loose while I'm driving down the highway. But anyway, I'm going to do the other side and come right back. All right, apologize for the angle. Now we're basically looking at the shock absorber underneath right here, and so we're going to take off these bolts. Mine are 13 mil, but I've got aftermarket, so I'm not sure if that's standard bolt size. I'm just going to do that. And then I'm going to put this guy up here so I can complete my mission. If I can keep everything together. You know what? Just realized this is what makes YouTube filming so hard. I don't want to get in the way of the camera. Oops, before I get ahead of myself, there are a couple of things you might want to think about. I went ahead and undid my sway bar links because that'll allow it to go down another 2 or 3 inches. I have long brake lines, but you might not. I went ahead and did this anyway, just in case. Get yourself the proper Torx bit and remove the brake line here so it'll allow it to flex. If you're worried about your brake line, because the other side goes down farther than this, and if you're worried about the fact that maybe you have short brake lines or something, then maybe you don't let it hang down all the way. Maybe you keep a smaller jack stand under the axle to keep the brake line from coming all the way taut, or maybe you remove the caliper, whatever. Just consider your brake lines. That's an important step here. And last but not least, you can't see it, there's that little annoying clamp back there that kind of clamps over the bottom coil of your spring. Definitely want to loosen that up and get that loose all before you let all of this kind of drop down. So at the same time you're doing your bottom 2 bolts on your shocks, do those other things. Brake line, decide whether you want to do this, or just, and then you have to do this little clamp at the bottom there. Get those done, and then eventually, once you get to this point, then you're going to have to do some spring compressors, and I'll show you that in a little bit. All right, so now I have the shocks unbolted at the bottom on either side. I'm going to jack up the car again, and then I'm going to move those jack stands to the frame, the section of the frame immediately behind the bracket for the lower control arm, okay? So I'm going to do it side by side. I'm going to do driver's side first, then I'm going to do passenger side, and we'll see how low we can get this to hang from the springs. and from the steering. All right, so now the suspension is hanging. Basically the steering, the track bar are what's holding it in place, not the springs. I'm just gonna see, well, they're not quite loose on their own, and that's where this next step comes in. And that is, you can get these, I rented these from one of the major, parts stores. But it is it's a coil spring compressor, all right? And I'll show you how it's set up. Just let me get it set up and then I'll show you how it's done. We're gonna do the passenger side since I have easier access to that right now, just based on conditions within my, my garage. Turns out I was wrong. The tool that you're actually gonna need is not that coil spring compressor, because you need a hole in the bottom of your perch to push that up through, and the Jeep spring perches don't have a hole. So you just need standard spring compressors for McPherson struts like these. And I'll put them on here in a second and show you how it's done. One thing to mention, once you've got everything dropped down and hanging, your driver's side is going to drop down further, and you can actually remove your driver's side spring depending on what kind of lift you've got. I've got a 3-inch lift. My driver's side spring came out on its own, but once I put the spacers on, I'm still going to need to compress that spring to get it back on to the perch, because that spacer is going to take up 1.5 inches. And I'll show you the spacers I'm using. I'll leave a link to these below. They're steel, got them off of Amazon. Pretty good quality. They seem like they're welded well. They're not exactly a super tight fit, so I hope there's no rattling once I've got these on. But anyway, let's go ahead and get this started in terms of compressing this spring. Now, you do want to be careful with these. With any spring compressor. In some of my other videos, I know with my Honda, I've used these before, and it's with the Honda, it's a little safer because it's a McPherson strut. You've got a strut going up the middle of the spring. With these, you don't have that, so I'm a little bit maybe overly cautious. I don't know, but I'm definitely very cautious when it comes to using these, because once I get this compressed to the point where it needs to be, it's going to be stored up. A lot of energy is going to be stored up in that spring. So, all right, so they're set up. They're on opposite sides of the spring. That's the way you want it, as close to opposite as you can get. And then what you're going to do is you're going to turn the bolts on these. I usually count out the number of turns. I'll do 10 on one side, 10 on the other. You don't want to use what's it called? An impact wrench on these things. I've seen people do that on YouTube and get away with it. I get really cautious with these things, so I'm just going to use a standard crow's foot with a ratchet on the other end, so a combo, and I'll speed up the speed so you don't have to sit through the whole thing. Okay, that took longer than I thought. The bump stop, you can either remove now or you can take it out before. I suggest don't take the bump stop out until you get the spring removed. This kind of got in the way. Make sure you have a pry bar. You might need that on the passenger side. So now let's go ahead and remove the, up at the very top, you've got that rubber spring thing, the thing that keeps your spring from rattling around. You want to remove that. And if yours is rotten, now's a good time to get yourself a new one. I put this on when I did my lift, so it's not that old, but these can be a pain to get off. All right, so you're going to want to take your spacer, and that rubber thing is going to go underneath like that. And then that all just slides back on. And that rubber thing is going to keep your spacer. That rubber thing is going to keep your spacer in place. Now the trick is, can we get the spring back on? I do want to show you. I have it sitting pointed in either direction, like nothing is pointed at me. Because if that thing fails and pops off, it's like a cannon. And I want it to either go into one of my walls or shooting across the garage. I don't want that shooting into me. So we're going to be very careful picking this up, hopefully, and very careful putting it back in. And we'll see how this goes. All right, so I forgot I have to reinstall this first, then try and put the spring back on. All right, so I clearly didn't compress it enough. I'm gonna have to compress it some more. What I'm going to try is rearranging the spring compressor. So I'm going to let it off and then see if I can get it further, because what's happening is this is barely moving. I don't know what's going on. So let me try uncompressing and redoing the positioning of this compressor. GoPro just died. So I'm a coward, and the amount of compression I got on this spring is pretty intense right now. But like, let me see if I can do this with one hand. This is dangerous. But like, I'm like I can almost get over the perch down there. So I'm gonna do it a little bit further, see how far I can go with this, and then I'll come back. All right, so I think I'm almost there. Don't forget, if you took this out, now's a good time to put it back in, because I don't think you'll be able to get it in after all this is assembled. My plan is it's inside there. I'm going to take this pry bar and I'm going to try and the bottommost coil over here, I can get it to kind of rest on the perch. So I'm going to use this pry bar, try and pry it up and really kind of jam it over the perch, and then have it just snap down into place, at which point I'll have to do a little twisting and stuff to get the spring oriented correctly, but look, I'll deal with that when I get there. So anyway, I think I'm making progress. All right, so using the pry bar worked, but this came flying out. So I'm gonna try and pry this up again and then slide this back up inside. But this is definitely the way you gotta do it, and it's tough. Other side will be easier, it can droop farther. I suppose the other way you could do this is to drop all your steering components and pull the control arms off and everything, but that's a lot of work. Not that this isn't. Anyway, we'll see. All right, so got that in. Now, the end of the spring is on the other side of this perch, but there's a seat for it right up here behind this, the place where your sway bar link attaches to the axle. It's right back here. So I'm going to start loosening these, and as I do, I'm going to have to figure out how I can start to kind of rotate the spring around to get it seated correctly. So we'll see as I go if I'm going to succeed. I don't know. If that doesn't work, I'll have to figure something out. So, but I'm basically going to loosen these up a little at a time, try twist. The problem is this, it's going to be in the way over here. So I don't know if I can loosen that up a lot and leave this one kind of compressed over here. I don't know. I'm going to try. So after much pry barring, 2x4 to help me pry, compressing and uncompressing little bits at a time, and kind of wiggling this around, I got it seated almost. You can see the end of the spring right there, and the spacer's in place. So now I'm going to do the driver's side, and then I'll come back and show you to put everything back together. All right, so I've gone ahead and jacked up from the axle a little bit. My jack stands are still in place. So I'm not taking the full front end weight onto the jack stand. I'm just lifting the axle back up a bit so that now my shocks are seated and I can bolt those back into place. I'm going to bolt the brake line on this side, on the passenger side, back into place. And I'm going to have to wait for this because it's still lower on the driver's side. And so this tie rod kind of is canted, so it's pointing that way a little bit. So I'm going to wait for that and jack it up on the driver's side and do everything, then come back and finish this one off. So yeah, getting there, progress. I'll come back after I've gotten to that point where I can put the wheels back on. All right, so I've got everything reattached now. I have not yet bolted these in because the way that the axle is still hanging low, it's very difficult to get these attached. So what I'm going to do now is jack up from the center of the axle, and I'm going to adjust my sway bar and get those bolts or get those nuts attached and tightened down. And then once all that is done, then what I'm going to do is basically jack up as high as I can from the axle. I'm going to move the jack stands to the axle to hold it up from there. Then I'm going to put the tires on and torque from there. So from here, it's really easy. So first thing you want to do, jack up on the axle, get these attached. Then arrange it so you can jack really high on the axle. Get your jack stand out of the frame and under the axle. Put your tires back on and you're done. Eager to see how this looks, so I'll come back and show you when it's all finished. All right, so axle's on the jack stands. I'm going to put the tires back on, torque them up. I usually go to 100, 110 foot-pounds, and we'll see what she looks like. And here she is. I could not be more happy. I mean, look at this thing. It's just, with the spacers on the front, it definitely looks better. It doesn't look like I'm doing a nosedive, and looks more aggressive, looks more like a Jeep, like an off-road vehicle. So very happy with the results here. Took a lot of effort, a lot of trial and error. But again, this is why you watch this channel instead of Chris Fix. Chris isn't going to show you what it's really like to do these projects. Anyway, like, subscribe, Doc out. Oh, you made it to the end. That's awesome. Listen, I'm Doc. I'm the one who's, the voice behind these videos. And I really appreciate you taking the time to actually watch the whole thing. That's fantastic. If you've got time, if you want to, if you like the video, hit like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to hit the bell button so you get notified of new videos when I put them up. I'm going to try and do one a week. And I'm going to do a bunch of Instagram stuff, so make sure you follow me there and on Twitter. Instagram's going to be the shorter stuff. I don't have any merchandise yet. I'm planning to as the channel grows. If I succeed, I'll get some merch. For now, if you really want to help me in another way, you like these videos enough, I'm going to put links to my books in the description of the video. I'm a science fiction author in my spare time as well, so I'm juggling a lot of balls. But anyway, I really appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you at the next one. Hey, do me a favor and turn this junk off. I don't know how to deal with tech.